Hello and welcome to Bear Independent. This just came across my desk. Apparently, the DHS filed a report. Oh wait, no they didn't. They drafted a report to the council. And then the Washington Examiner got a hold of it, talking about how you should have 6 months of food put. No, it doesn't say 6 months. It says 14 days. Yeah, you got to actually read these things. But it does talk about catastrophic grid failure, which is what we're going to talk about today. What would the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, know about catastrophic grid failure? Hey man, I don't know. I mean, it's not like, raise your hand if you ever did contracting work for the DOE or the DOD or DHS or FEMA or half a dozen other alphabet soup agencies. Yeah, specifically dealing with the grid and grid vulnerability. So let's get this out of the way right now. The grid is indefensible, and in fact, I will drink to that. Thank you, Oklahoma, for finally getting on board with 5 Point beer. It still tastes terrible, but at least it's 5 Point. Now, let me reiterate, the grid is indefensible. There's a good point here. The grid is indefensible because it is centralized. Meaning you have the huge potential for cascading failures. So, first, let's get into this DHS report. Oh, wait, it's not a report. It was a draft of a report. And it wasn't to you, and it wasn't to Trump. It was to a council. I didn't recall which council. It was the council. Maybe it was the CFR, man, the Council on Foreign Relations, or the Illuminati, or the 300. Or probably some, appropriations committee somewhere, likely. Or some dude in the bowels of E-Ring at the Pentagon needed a report, and this is what happened. And then the Washington Examiner got a hold of it, and now here we are talking about it. So I've read, not the report, but the Washington Examiner's reporting on the report, and so that's what we're going to discuss. Because truthfully, after reading the reporting on the report, there's nothing in there that's new to a guy like me. Sorry. I mean, there's a reason I'm into preparedness, and it has a lot to do with the type of work that I've done in my life. So, the report allegedly discusses a 6-month scenario of catastrophic grid failure resulting in no electricity, no fuel, no transpo, no transportation, no money, no health care, and no food for 6 months. Let's foot stomp that. No electricity, no fuel, no transpo, no money, no health care, no food for 6 months. Now, some of us have been doing just fine without health care for a lot longer than 6 months. Thanks, Obama. However, that could be an issue for a lot of you. You know where it's going to go south for most people? Is the no electricity thing. What's that CDC report? 90% of North America's population is estimated to die after 1 year without grid power. 90%. So we'd say 6 months here if we just prorated it, 45%. It's a big deal. The whole no electricity thing, it's a big deal. The report, like I said, looked at a 6-month power outage. It recommended a 14-day food supply. Not a 6-month food supply, although you'd be well better, that's a word. It's tremendous, believe me. It's the best words. Everybody tells me. And what I'm most excited about is the fact that Mexico is indeed going to pay for these words. And look at Melania. She's beautiful. Have you seen her? It's tremendous. It's tremendous. With the hands. Tremendous. So, In light of all that, it recommended the draft of the report recommended 14 days of food supply, not 6 months, although you would be much better served with 6 months worth of food to get started with, says me. So, it considered the threat of a national blackout. A national blackout. A national blackout. What are we going to do with all the Teslas? How am I going to drive my Tesla to work if there's a national... Oh, I'll just get a battery bank. We are going to be looking at Edison batteries here, or at least discussing Edison batteries here on Patreon in the near future. So what I wanted to touch on here is that report, and then a couple of things. One, the whole food storage thing. Most people have 14 days worth of food in their house. Well, I say most. You should. If you have a pantry, there should be 2 weeks worth of food in it. I think actually, though, the statistic is the average household has 2 to 3 days worth of food in it. I, for the life of me, can't understand that. The way I was raised, like, we always had food because food is security. Like, even when we were poor, we had food. We had lots of food, and we put up our own food, and my dad planted a huge garden. I mean, I think it was 2 acres of garden. 1 acre for the house and 1 acre just to make Sam's salsa, and it was freaking delicious salsa. So think about that, an acre just for salsa, okay? And, you know, animals, the chickens, the cows, the hog, the blah, 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 right? All the blah, blah, blahs. So I don't understand how people don't have 14 days worth of food in their house already. But apparently that's an issue. So you should have at least 14 days worth of food in your house. What does that look like? I would recommend 30 pounds per person as a 14-day supply of food. I really like 60 pounds per person per month, which, if you're good at math, works out to about 720 pounds per year, which I round up to 750 pounds per person per year, because that's approximately 3,000-ish calories per day per person. And people would say, well, you really only need, 1,500. You can live on 1,500. Yeah, if you're sitting in cubicle land, 1,500 is fine. But if you're out there getting after it because, I don't know, the power went out and hasn't been on for 6 months and you're trying to stay warm, 3,000 calories is going to serve you much better. So that's the food storage thing. And if you're new here, this might be, some kind of the Oracle has spoken moment for you. If you've been at this channel for a while, you know where I stand on this. We talk about food storage all the time. I do boring stewed food storage videos or stewed forage videos, either or. Do boring food storage videos just to show you I practice what I preach, and it's not that hard. I literally have my 2-year-old toddler help me do it because it's that easy. Right? You get a bucket, get food, bucket, food, lid, next. Okay? So you should have at least 14 days worth of food in your house. If you don't, get it. Moving on. Let's talk about the fact that the grid is indefensible. And I don't mean like maybe. I mean, it is absolutely indefensible. Some of you guys may remember out there on the left coast a while ago, but not too long ago, there were some people running around with a light 50 shooting holes in transformers. An oil-cooled transformer? Anybody here seen First Blood? John J. Rambo? They drew First Blood. What do you got in the back of the truck? M60, boss. Right? At the end of that scene, pull all the way back, push forward, right? At the end of that movie, he takes out the oil-cooled, pole-mounted transformer to the sheriff's department. Easy peasy, right? Those things, though, you've probably seen your local co-op has a yard with 50, 100, 3,000 of those sitting, depending on how big your county is and how big your power company is. Of those pole-mounted transformers just sitting on the ground. That's not a terrible inconvenience. They can be replaced in an evening or an afternoon. No big deal, right? If you take out a bunch of them, yeah, that's a problem. And by the way, all you nefarious ne'er-do-wells, I'm not going to give you all the tips, tricks, and hints that you need to knock the grid out, okay? But I will tell you those are stocked. The biggins, the big transformers, they're custom made. The lead time on those from the factory is anywhere between 18 and 36, months. The last one that I installed was on a trailer that had 36 axles underneath it, and I think it weighed about 600 tons, if I'm remembering correctly. I know we used a 1,200-ton crane to set it. So, yeah. So if there's no fuel and no electricity, you're not making more transformers. You're not running the crane. Oh, by the way, that crane has a 400-gallon fuel tank, and it uses a tank full of fuel every 8 hours. So, you hear the coyotes? Anyway, at some point the system degrades, right? When the inputs stop flowing and you can't smack inputs into the system over and over and over again, the system stops, which is indicative of a piss poor system. If your system is highly dependent on inputs, reciprocal inputs over and over and over again, you have a bad system. That's why we're out here running this little tiny channel called Bear Independent away from the system as much as we can be, so that we don't have to worry about things like a national grid down event where 45+% of the population dies because they only had 2 to 3 days worth of food in their house. So decentralization is necessary, says me, because the grid is indefensible. It's also viable because centralized renewable electricity, the big green push that you'll see on a federal level, is not going to work. We don't have the capacitor technology yet, which means that all of these renewables have to be used based upon demand. There's secondary generation. Primary generation is done by scaling steam turbines using combustibles, right? You know, dead dinosaur carcasses or whatever you believe in. Combustibles. You need to make heat to make steam. You need more power, you open the valve a little bit, you get some more steam. You need less power, you close the valve a little bit, you get less steam, which means the generator turns a little bit faster or a little bit slower. You get a little bit more power, a little bit less power. It's ultimately scalable. That's done through a SCADA system, system controls and data acquisition. It's all automated, right? It's just a bunch of digital gauges and needles just sitting there just kind of ticking back and forth, and some guy just sitting there watching all the little ones and zeros fly by. It's quick. It's easy. Once it's implemented, it's easy. Renewables aren't that way. Let's say you put up a whole bunch of 1.5 megawatt wind turbines in a wind array, right? 10 to 14 grouped on a circuit. They all tie back through an underground collection system back to the substation. They go through a giant transformer, and then they run overland from where the power is collected on the collection system, where it's produced, back through the transmission line to where the market is, your neighborhood. So if I need, let's say I need 500 more megawatts, right? But I got 1.5 megawatt turbines. The math sucks. I'm always going to be a little bit over, a little bit under, right? And so I'm sitting there clicking, turn this turbine on, turn this turbine off. Oh, the wind drops, slightly pitch it in, pitch it out, blah, 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 blah. It's not as easily scalable. And we can't store it because it's instant electricity. If there's no wind, there's no power. If there's no wind when there's peak demand, turbines do you no good. If there's lots of wind when there's not peak demand, maybe, right? But it has to be used right now. There's not like a hole that all the wind goes into, and then when we need wind, we take it out of the hole and throw it at the wind turbine. It doesn't work that way. Same thing with the sun. We don't fill up the swimming pool full of sunshine and then save it for when we need it, right? Our capacitor technology sucks on the grid scale. On utility scale, it sucks. We can't capture and hold that many electrons at one time. But you can at your house. I can here. At your small business or light industrial operation, or certainly in agricultural applications, you can absolutely do that, because you can get you a bank of Edison batteries or golf cart batteries or whatever, and put up a scalable solar photovoltaic system where you start with 3 panels, then go to 6, and then oh, tax time, we got our money, we're gonna buy 12 more or whatever, right? And you can add as you go. I don't think that's the right way to do it because it costs you more money over time, but if you have to piecemeal it, you can. So, but it's ultimately scalable because it's decentralized. You take responsibility for it on your end. So, and there are issues with being grid tied. If there's an EMP, you should have a disconnect, and there's stopgap measures, right? If you're grid tied to renewables, there's things that happen there, and that's a much more in-depth discussion. But the point is, if it's decentralized, it's much harder to wipe out, at least as far as scumbags go. EMP, whole nother story. Likelihood of an EMP depends on who you talk to. And also understand that the more and more power demand there is, the more and more high line goes up, the bigger the antenna gets that's going to catch that EMP. So the more catastrophic an EMP event is going to be. So let's recap. DHS report? No, it was a draft of a report. To who? The council. If it said the name of the council, I didn't catch it. Excellent reporting, Washington Examiner. Should you have 6 months of food? Yeah, I think so, but that's not what the report said. It said 14 days. However, you should have way more than 6 months worth of food. If you don't, get started on it. The grid is indefensible, period, the end. It's just not possible to protect all of it all the time. And if you take out certain elements of it, you will have a cascading effect that will knock out the rest of it. And there's the eastern grid, the western grid, the Texas grid. Oklahoma's put in well over 1,000 miles of high line to kind of interconnect all of those. And there are pinch points. There are choke points. Like all things, there are strategic choke points. And again, I'm not going to tell you how to take the grid down, but I will tell you that it's not going to take all the manpower and yeah, it's just not as intensive as you think it is. And it's certainly not as robust as you think it is, or as anybody else thinks that it is. And DOE has known this for a long time. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So lastly, decentralization. If you know that the grid's going to go away, why are you still attached to it? Why are you living your life as if it'll just be there all the time? Make your actions match your ambitions. Get off grid. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have $82,000 worth of renewable energy smacked on top of your little cabin, but if you want to, go for it. But it could be as simple as you have a generator and some fuel stockpiled, or you just get by without the flow of electrons, or whatever. Right? There are ways to do it. And that's a different discussion for a different time. But I just wanted to address this report because I've gotten so many emails about it, including from my own dad, who has done a lot of cool, interesting things in his own right that most of y'all are not cleared to even talk about, which is awesome. That man has stories. And so when he starts emailing me about stuff like this, in conjunction with a bunch of my patrons and a bunch of viewers here on YouTube, it kind of makes me think, all right, T, go ahead and shoot a video. So this may not be the video that you wanted to hear on the subject, but it is the video that I'm going to produce on the subject. 14 weeks worth of food, 14 days worth of food is a joke. You should have a year's worth of food minimum, then build up from there. If you are grid tied, you should figure out a way to not be grid tied and understand that the grid is indefensible. It is not possible to defend the grid. It will go away. Just a matter of when. And it's not an if, it's a when the grid goes away. And lastly, the DHS draft for catastrophic grid failure. What are you going to do? mentally war game. What are you going to do? 6 months, no food, no fuel, no money, no health care, no transpo. What are you going to do? What does that look like on your daily? How do you make it through 6 months of that? Be set apart. Population density matters. Preparedness matters. And not a doomsday prepper, you know, super high pulse rate, high blood pressure, super hyped up. The world's ended, man. Not that. No. None of that BS. We don't operate from positions of fear around here, right? We do things smart. We do them well. We operate from positions of strength. There is, in my opinion, an excellent Patreon video at our channel called Positions of Strength. That doesn't talk about fortified positions. It doesn't talk about Overwatch. It talks about here and here. Positions of strength. And no, that's not a shameless plug for Patreon. It's just a fact. It's there, not here. And so I would encourage you to find your own position of strength and operate from that. That if you find yourself in a catastrophic grid down scenario, you have more than the leftover Chinese food in your fridge. Shalom.